What is up, everybody, and welcome to the Lone Gunman podcast. This is a special November edition just for you. As you might be able to tell from the title of this show, what we're going to be talking about this evening uh, is Oliver Stone's brand new film, documentary, entitled JFK Revisited Through the Looking Glass. Now, I've heard that this documentary was in the works for quite a while now, and I'm glad it finally got some distribution this year. And I was able to watch it last night for the first time, and I decided, you know what? We need to talk about it, folks. We need to talk about it for sure. And don't get me wrong. Um, I don't know of any nice way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. This movie was written by Jim DiEugenio. And anyone out there who has been listening to Jim DiEugenio, whether it be at the various conferences, whether it be on Black Op Radio, uh, he has a very particular stand on the way the Kennedy assassination needs to be viewed. And that is what me and Doug like to call the view of CIA primacy in the assassination. And what that means, folks, is the fact that Allen Dulles and, of course, the CIA were behind the Kennedy assassination. Now, that being said, when we're talking about this Oliver Stone documentary, okay, this is not like a Hollywood movie. In 1991, when the movie JFK was released, there were several instances in the movie of Hollywood license taking various liberties to convey a particular idea or scenario or implication. What I mean by that is that the film is not historically accurate in many instances. Now, it does draw into it many uh, complexities and stories and witnesses and suspects that did actually exist. But the story itself is not quite how things went down. Now, I will say this. The title of the movie, just from the get-go, uh, JFK Revisited, Through the Looking Glass. I would say that this movie is more of a standalone documentary. It is not a look back at the Oliver Stone movie of 1991. It does not revisit it, if you will, much. There are a couple instances in the documentary where it does pull from some certain scenes in the movie. And that's about it. To me, glaringly absent from JFK Revisited is any mention of Mr. X and his unified grand conspiracy theory of the United States government. I believe that in the past year or so, several researchers, including Doug and myself, have proven without a shadow of a doubt that Fletcher Prouty is full of shit. Uh, so thankfully, none of that was included in the movie. None of Fletcher Prouty's accusations made a impact on this documentary, which is good because I believe there was a giant light shed on the accusations of Fletcher Prouty and versus the actual truth of the matter. I think Fletcher Prouty embellished quite a lot. I believe that after he left his military service and entered the private sector, he fancied himself an attention whore and subsequently inserted himself into the JFK assassination researcher milieu and brought forth many certain scenarios that had an impact on the way people view how the assassination may have went down, and inserted some anomalies that really weren't quite there, and basically recanted it all to the ARB. And everyone that Fletcher Prouty had ever mentioned by name and anything that he ever said totally denied any of his accusations. So gladly that was left out. Hopefully, Eugenio saw this uh, discourse on the Ed Forum or listened to our shows about it, and thankfully left it out of there because to me, Fletcher Prouty is no different than James Files, Judy Baker, or anybody with a good story that fancied themselves close to the action uh, and inserted themselves in the annals of history. So thankfully that was left out. But folks, I will tell you this, there is a lot of this movie. I mean, it's 2 hours long. And what really got, what really grated me uh, with this movie is, first of all, it's narrated by Whoopi Goldberg, who I can't freaking stand as an actress or actor or whatever you want to call her, comedian. Um, I don't know. It's something about her voice that just turns me off. And she narrates this documentary, uh, supposedly alongside Donald Sutherland, but I only recall hearing Donald Sutherland for maybe 20 minutes out of this entire documentary. Most of it was Whoopi Goldberg. And why she was chosen to narrate this film, I have no idea. Maybe she needed the money. I don't know. I'm sure uh, Oliver Stone could have gotten a much bigger name. Maybe Kevin Costner, for instance. That might have been a good one. Um, but thankfully it wasn't Jim DiEugenio, or we'd all been asleep by like the 20-minute mark. But there are several researchers who were spotlighted in this documentary, some of which I'll include here. Dr. David Mantic, Dr. Cyril Weck, Brian Edwards, Deborah Conway, Gary Aguilar, David Talbot, Dr. Henry Lee, Barry Ernest, Doug Horn, Dr. Donald Miller, John Newman, Lisa Pease, just to name a few. Um, so let's get right into it, folks. Now, I will tell you this. If you have not watched the movie yet, this will be a spoiler podcast for you. Um, so if you don't want to be spoiled, if you have plans to watch this documentary anytime soon, you might as well turn this off now and revisit when you're done. If it's something you don't mind being spoiled, because I watched it twice, just to make sure that I didn't miss anything. And it's definitely rewatchable. There's a lot of information packed in these 2 hours, and a second watch would probably be advisable. So if you don't want to hear anything about this documentary, I suggest turning the show off now and revisiting when you're done. If you have no plans or you don't have Showtime or you're not going to be able to see this thing anytime soon, stuff's going to leak out all over anyway, so you might as well get it from this horse's mouth. Um, Now, the film itself begins with a probably 10-minute intro into the political climate of the early 1960s and some of the difficulties that Kennedy was facing in his administration. Um, again, nothing crazy here. We all know about, what was going on with the CIA and the things that Eisenhower had in effect as Kennedy took over the presidency. What the CIA was trying to do with, the Bay of Pigs, assassinating Patrice Lumumba. The Americans, the American public, were so taken aback by what the Zapruder film showed, which was back and to the left, back and to the left. They've heard about it, they've seen stills in Life magazine, but to actually see it in motion on national television raised a lot of hackles and outrage in the American uh, eyes. Henceforth, a House Select Committee on Assassinations was formed in 1976 to investigate the political assassinations of the 1960s. Um, then we move on from there. And, to his credit, Oliver Stone can toot his own horn a little bit in his own documentary for his accomplishments, because I agree that if it wasn't for his film, JFK, raising more questions than answers about the Kennedy assassination, which led, of course, to him testifying in front of Congress and our Congress mandating the JFK Records Act of 1992, signed by George H.W. Bush, I'm sorry, into law, stating that within the next 25 years, the intelligence agencies, or I'm sorry, that all records of all political assassinations would be made public, and that a committee would be formed called the Assassination Records and Review Board immediately to start declassifying and collecting documents from the FBI, Secret Service, CIA, and that all of these government entities had to comply. Now, of course, hindsight is 2020, and we've gotten, a shit pile of documents were released in the 90s, for sure. And we've had some trickle outs since then, and here we are in 2021. Okay, 30 years later, after the movie JFK came out, and President Joe Biden is still stonewalling the release of the remaining JFK files. The date has now been pushed back to December of 2022. Yeah, and I'm sure it'll be pushed back again. But again, you're giving these giant government agencies ample time to do and sanitize or remove anything that they feel fit from the record. As I've said before on this show, I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure documents and records have been expunged from the record, removed, burnt, shredded, uh, blown up, whatever you want to call it. And any of the explosive smoking gun type documents are non existent anymore. Um, And he goes on to tell us, of course, that in this movie, he is going to explain what really happened and why to JFK. Notice he doesn't say the who, because that's one of those things that are implied all the time by folks like Jim DiEugenio, by folks who would have you believe that the CIA and Allen Dulles were behind the assassination, despite not having any concrete proof thereof. So it's simply implied through, well, once you see this movie, you'll see why. Um, we then go on to problems with the magic bullet. Um, and it's much like, a History Channel documentary. Some of the stuff that's interspersed in this Oliver Stone movie is very much on that level. With the experts weighing in and the fancy graphics and explaining everything and all that. Um, and it's explained very well in the movie. Okay, the Warren Commission, the FBI, the Dallas Police, they're all locked into 3 bullets because only 3 shells were found on the 6th floor of the school book depository. So they explained it. You say, oh, well, the first shot hit the president, the second shot hit Connolly, and then the third shot was the headshot. That's what happened. Well, then James Tagg steps forward and claims that he was hit in the face by a bullet that skidded off of a curb on Elm Street. So that had to be taken into account. Now, whether or not they actually believe that that is what happened, I don't know. It would have been much, much easier, I think, to dismiss James Tagg um, as just being hit by a piece of shrapnel or a piece of bone or a piece of glass or something like that than to try to incorporate an entire bullet to basically explain the scratch that he got on his face. But nonetheless, that led us to the magic bullet and Arlen Specter and his magic bullet theory. Now, that theory, of course, is that one bullet is ascribed to creating 7 wounds in 2 men. And basically, to do that, he created these very elaborate setups that he had with a pointer, and he was, trying to explain how this one bullet did all this damage to 2 men and come out looking pristine at the end. They explained how CE 399, there's problems with the chain of custody, and that a private researcher named John Hunt found many problems with the chain of custody. There is no initials of Elmer Todd on the bullet that is in the National Archives, CE 399. No initials, yet he said he initialed the bullet. There's documents presented where the time and the evidence at the FBI lab where Robert Frazier said that he got the bullet, CE 399, was 7:30 p.m. There's another document where Elmer Todd stated that he received the bullet from the Secret Service, who brought it back from Dallas at 8:50 p.m. on November 22nd. So, yeah, that's a problem. And like Henry Lee says in the documentary, that if the chain of evidence, or the chain of custody of the bullet is broken, then all of that is like ink, invisible. You can't use it in court because nobody can prove that this is the same bullet that was brought back by the Secret Service from Dallas. And there's a lot of discrepancy between the FBI documents that state that the bullet CE-399 is the same one that was found on the stretcher by Tomlinson, to which he gave to O.P. Wright, to which he gave to the FBI, or I'm sorry, the Secret Service. So there's a lot of problems. They said that the bullet that they found was pointed, not rounded like CE-399. So we have a lot of problems. We even have Bardwell Odom of the Dallas office of the FBI mentioned in a document stating that he interviewed Tomlinson and Wright, and it was the same bullet. And then he's interviewed some years later and states that he never did such a thing, and he doesn't know why any of that is in a document. He said he would have created a 302 on it, as would have been standard procedure back in the day, and he did no such thing, and he doesn't remember ever talking to the actual people that found the bullet or handled the bullet and ascribed to them that it was 399. So that's a problem, folks. It's a big problem. And again, a lot of the information in this movie has been out there for years. It is just culminated into a cohesive narrative for easy consumption by a lot of those folks who aren't like me and you that know a lot about the assassination. Somebody that doesn't know jack shit about the assassination could watch this movie and really be awed by it. And I mean, really be wowed, really be awed, and really come away in disbelief at how this shit has been going on for almost 60 years. And, we're still being lied to. It's crazy. Um, now, there is some things in this movie that your boy did not know. So I'm glad I watched the movie because I was informed a couple different times in this movie by things that I was not familiar with. One of those things is a man by the name of Dr. Joseph Dolce. Now, I'd never heard of that name before, but this man was commissioned by the Warren Commission to do some investigation with Lee Harvey Oswald's man, the Carcano. He was given 100 rounds of ammunition into which he shot the wrists of that many cadavers. Well, I guess a cadaver has 2 wrists, so maybe he only used 50 dead bodies. Not sure. But in every instance that he shot into the wrist of a cadaver, every instance, the bullet came out deformed, mushroomed, or shredded in some weird way. Now, why did he shoot into the wrist? Well, we know that one of the wounds in John Connolly was a fractured wrist. The bullet entered his wrist, fractured his bone, and then went into his thigh. Now, the lone nutters and the naysayers can say, okay, well, that bullet went through Kennedy somehow and did not touch any bone. It just hit soft tissue and organs. Okay, fine. Then you could say it entered John Connolly and exited his chest somehow, missing his entire rib cage, but yet I believe he did have a broken rib. So this bullet smashed through Connolly's ribs, smashed through his wrist, and embedded itself in his leg, yet it comes out looking damn near perfect. Not mushroomed, not deformed. And this was tested on over 100 cadaver wrists and never duplicated, folks. Never duplicated. It was shot, these wrists were shot from different trajectories, different distances, all of which could not be duplicated by Dr. Joseph Dolce. And shocker, folks, yet he was commissioned by the Warren Report to do this. He was left out of the Warren Commission report. And any of his findings were left out of the 26 volumes for some reason. I wonder why. I wonder why. So I thought that that was a good little tidbit there that I did not know. And here we go, Jim DiEugenio. We are shown footage of Alan Dulles in Dealey Plaza, where he visited, and while they were trying to recreate different things in the school book depository, like Oswald's escape, and they were there to see it firsthand, where exactly things took place, the distances, and all that. It's just a subtle little Alan Dulles in Dealey Plaza kind of thing, you know what I mean? And then we're given back to the Warren Commission, where we're told that Hale Boggs, Sherman Cooper, Russell, and Long did not believe in the single bullet theory. They were all dissenting of that opinion. And I think that is important to note that 4 out of 7 of the Warren commissioners did not believe in the single bullet theory. And in the movie, they actually have a phone call between Lyndon Johnson and Senator Russell, where he pretty much tells Lyndon Johnson, look, I don't believe in this single bullet theory. I think it was 2 separate bullets. And he's like, Connolly says it was 2 separate bullets. I'm not convinced. And that's where I stand on it. He's like, I can't get down with that. And even Johnson agrees with him. And it says, yeah, I think it was 2 separate bullets. So he also complains in his private papers um, about Nicholas Katzenbach, the Katzenbach memo in the FBI, who pretty much wanted to hang this thing around Lee Oswald's neck from the get-go, no matter what. Like this is where this is going. This is what we're trying to prove, that it was this guy and this guy alone. And although it's not really mentioned in the movie, I personally, you have to go back and you have to put yourself in the position of these important agencies. And we'll get into more a little bit later with the CIA and FBI. Um, and if they wanted to distance themselves from this Russian defector and Castro loving pinko commie, um, and somehow make this guy look like a nut, because God forbid if he was you know tied to any of these foreign agencies or countries, that it could start World War III. We could get into a nuclear war. Millions of people could die because the public would demand that we do something about it. I get that. I get that. Or was it more of a cover your ass thing between the CIA and the FBI? Because this guy was on their radar. And we'll get into more about that too later on. You know, They were watching this guy. They were opening his mother's mail when he was in Russia. From the moment he defected, you better believe files were opened up. J. Edgar Hoover knew who the hell he was. Um, Oswald's mother was writing letters to the FBI, the State Department. Um, you know, Hoover wrote a document that says somebody's using his social security number. Um, and we'll get into more about the defection later, but you know, I just don't understand whether or not the creation of the Warren Commission was legitimate or designed to lay the blame at the feet of a lone nut. Therefore, you know, everything is done. He's not connected to anybody. They don't have to do anything. And that the matter will be put to bed and we move on as a country. Uh, and then we cut back to Alan Dulles, a little interview with him. He's asked if there's, anything that's in the Warren Commission documents that are sealed. He said, when they come out, he's asked, when all these documents come out from the Warren Commission, is the public going to see anything crazy? And Dulles says, nope, absolutely not. Everything was transparently done. We have nothing to hide, which is so much horseshit. But okay. So then we move on in the movie to the rifle, the Mannlicher Carcano. Now, we know from uh, certain things that Alex Heidel ordered a 36-inch model Mannlicher Carcano. And what was actually received, allegedly, by him was a 40.2-inch Mannlicher Carcano. Now, what's interesting is they get into some research done about the rifle. We have, and I thought it was an interesting tidbit. One, it's hard to argue with, and um, good to throw up in lone nutters' faces, that the rifle that they take out of the schoolbook depository has straps. The straps are on the side of the rifle. The strap goes from the side of the butt to the side of the rifle. And this is what is kind of pictured. I believe it's in the ad from Klein's, if I remember correctly. But then in the backyard photos that have been allegedly doctored, uh, the strap goes from the bottom of the butt of the rifle to the bottom of the stock of the rifle. So that's a big problem. It also mentions something that I'd never heard before about Oswald's ring. If you look closely at the different backyard photos, we have A, B, and C. I believe it's backyard photo B, as Oswald is holding up um, the worker or whatever it is, you can clearly see a ring on his right hand. And in C version, it says that ring is moved to the left hand, which is clearly visible. He's holding up a rifle and the papers. And, unless it's a trick of light, yeah, that's kind of a mistake. Now, it can be easily explained away as well. In Russia, married people wear their wedding ring on their right finger, and maybe the other ring on the other finger on the left hand was his Marine Corps ring. Maybe he was wearing two rings like pimp style. He's got rings on both hands. I don't know. It's just interesting, some of the weird allegations when you're looking at some of this evidence that Stone included in his film. And thank God he left Judith Baker out of this goddamn documentary. Because I was really worried after all the horse assery and nonsense going down in 2019 at the COPA conference and them two looking like star-crossed lovers, holding each other and hugging and tonguing each other's throats or whatever they were doing. I don't know. Um, Leave you, Judy. I'm so glad none of that shit got in the documentary. Hallelujah. Then another cut scene to some more Alan Dulles and Dealey Plaza. Little subtle digs. So just to plant some shit in your subconscious, you know what I mean? It's a recurring theme in this documentary. You'll see Alan Dulles very much in this movie, interspersed in the weirdest times. Then we move on to the Vicki Adams story, which of course um, was a problem for the FBI. And for those not familiar with the Vicki Adams story, she worked on the fourth floor for one of the book um, distributors. And immediately after the assassination, her and another coworker, I believe her name was Sandra Stiles, left the window that they were watching the motorcade route at and proceeded to the back stairway and went down the stairs and never saw Baker or Truly or Oswald or anybody else for that matter. What's interesting about that is that their supervisor, uh, Dorothy Garner, and this is a Martha Jo Stroud document uncovered by the ARRB and included by author Barry Ernest in his book, The Girl on the Stairs, which is a great read, by the way, and I highly recommend it. Basically saying that after Vicki Adams and Sandra Stiles left the window, she followed them. And she followed them out to the fourth floor landing on the back stairway. And she kind of hung out there for a second and watched them descend the stairs. And then a little bit later, up comes uh, Baker and Truly. Nobody ever came down the stairs. Now, what the detractors of the Vicki Adams story will have you tell you or have you believe is that Oswald was faster than them. But it clearly states um, when she talked to author Barry Ernest. Now, the problem with all this is the stenotype of her Warren Commission testimony was destroyed by the Warren Commission. And they changed her testimony with what ended up in the report. And that, because they knew they had a big problem. It's pretty easy to discredit one person. But when they found out that she was with somebody else, well, David Beelan said, well, you're obviously mistaken about your timing. And she was like, well, no, I'm not. You can ask Sandra Stiles. She was with me. It's harder to discredit two people. He told her, look, I don't need Sandra Stiles. I've got you. And subsequently, like I said, her FBI testimony or her Warren Commission testimony was destroyed and changed in the Warren report. Something she didn't know until she went back and reread it. She had never checked in there to see what was her actual testimony in the Warren report. So for 40 years, she thought the truth was in the Warren report, what she told him. It wasn't. and she was baffled and shocked by it. And like I said, the Barry Ernest book, The Girl on the Stairs, I think he managed to track down Dorothy Garner, Sandra Stiles, and Vicki Adams, and he lays it out in a very compelling book. Exactly how all this went down and why they were a big problem for the Warren Commission's narrative. Cut scene back to Alan Dulles smoking and joking in Dealey Plaza. He's talking about one of the junior staffers. Aha! Yeah, I think he knows the city like the back of his hand now, as many times as he's had to come down here. Ha ha ha! Oh, makes you sick. So then we move on to Parkland Hospital, where we find the story of Dr. Kemp Clark and Dr. Malcolm Perry. Uh, Very shortly, like the same day or day after, are talking about an entrance wound in Kennedy's throat and a rear blowout in the back of his head. We have the testimony of Nurse Aubrey Bell, who was tracked down by the ARRB and got on tape stating, that some doctors from Bethesda had called Malcolm Perry and Kemp Clark and had them change their mind on the neck wound being an entrance wound. Um, and she states very clearly that she recalls seeing the president's brains and spinal fluid leaking out into a bucket on the floor and a giant gaping rear head wound. Now, uh, there was an FBI agent named Elmer Moore. No, he might have been a Secret Service agent. I'm not 100% sure. But this was the man who made, yes, it was a Secret Service agent. Elmer Moore made Dr. Perry change his mind, um, and basically say that, well, it could be an entrance wound or an exit wound. He got him to get off the fact that it was an entrance wound because that's a dead giveaway. That's a problem that, hey, there was a conspiracy. There was somebody else shooting from the front, which of course they could not have. They could not have. Now, some years later, a friend of Elmer Moore's, uh, was talking to him, and he pretty much admitted that Inspector Kelly of the Secret Service ordered him to change the mind of the Parkland doctors that there was no big hole in the rear of the head and that the front wound in the neck was an exit wound. In the early 90s, after the movie JFK, Dr. Charles Crenshaw wrote a book um, basically stating what he had seen and stating that the front wound was an entrance wound and, of course, the rear blowout to the back of the head, which magically disappeared by the time Kennedy had gotten to Bethesda. Um, Now, Malcolm Perry, this is where uh, what's his name? Dr. Donald Miller comes into effect. He was one of Malcolm Perry's co-workers after Perry had left Parkland and moved on in his profession somewhere else. And he said after a long night of doing surgery together, you know, he stated that he had asked Perry many times about working on President Kennedy and that Perry would never talk about it. He wouldn't say anything one way or the other. He said that after one night they were both exhausted and tired and sitting in the surgeon's room after a very stressful surgery. He said he asked him about it again and he said, "Look, I'm going to say this one time and one time only, and we're never going to talk about it again. It was an entrance wound in Kennedy's throat. I'm certain of it, 100% certain." I've seen bullet wounds before. That was an entrance wound. Again, unless it's on tape, guy, uh, or in a document somewhere, it's just one of those um, stories that made its way into the lore of the Kennedy assassination. And if true, it throws everything, into oblivion because it proves a shot from the front, and that's that. Then we get into the Bethesda autopsy and the autopsy photos. Apparently, the official autopsy photos taken at Bethesda were by a guy by the name Stringer, and several people believe, Doug Horn included, that a Robert Knudsen, who was a Kennedy family photographer, actually took a lot of the autopsy photos that we see today. There were many angles of the Kennedy brain that Stringer, when asked by the HSCA, said he didn't take. So apparently, Doug Horn thinks that some of these autopsy photos are missing, and some were inserted by Knudsen, and some were uh, doctored in some way as to conceal the giant blowout in the back of the head. Uh, then we get to Humes and Boswell. The movie explains how these guys had no experience dealing with bullet wounds, and so they called in Pierre Fink, but they had already started the autopsy. Um, Humes later went on to burn his notes, which is apparently a giant no-no, especially in such an important case, because the notes that you take while you're doing the autopsy are much more accurate than something recalled later. Um, they talk about Gerald Ford moving the back wound up to the rear of the neck to make the single bullet theory a little more plausible, and he did change the wording in the Warren report to say from the lower back to the lower neck. So that's interesting. Now, the HSCA, when they saw the autopsy photos, they could see where the bullet wound was in JFK's back. Clearly not in his neck. So that's a giant problem there, Gerald Ford. Um, the problem I see with the throat shot being an entrance wound, where's the bullet? If the bullet went into the neck and never exited, it had to still be in Kennedy. Now, whether it be inefficiency or purposeful misdirection, they never dissected the throat wound. They never went in and cut open the neck and looked for the bullet. Because as a bullet enters your body, it does not merely leave a tunnel. Um, it kind of becomes encased, if you will. Like, imagine a car entering a tunnel that's been carved in the side of a mountain. Okay, the car being the bullet, it goes in the tunnel, and the tunnel immediately closes behind it as it goes through. Your skin basically, and your organs and your muscles basically do the same thing. The bullet enters so quickly that everything, it doesn't just leave a gaping tunnel of a hole there. It kind of become encased in your body. So I think one of the inefficiencies of the Bethesda autopsy was to not dissect the throat wound. That's a problem. Or they might have actually found a bullet in there from the front. That would be bad because, again, that would prove that at the very least, Oswald did not do it alone, folks. Um, Now, they also address certain problems with the brain photos that are in the National Archives that only certain uh, researchers have been allowed to see. None of these photos are in public. Only people that have been approved by the Kennedy family have ever seen these brain photos. And the problem with the brain, Kennedy's brain, is that it was described by many at Parkland Hospital as a lot missing. If a bullet traverses from your temporal lobe area into your right occipital region, and there's a blowout in the back, a lot of that brain tissue is going to be expelled. And in some of these autopsy photos, you can clearly see brain matter embedded in Kennedy's hair hanging down the back. Okay. An average human brain weighs, I believe, 1,300 grams. At the Bethesda autopsy, they stated that Kennedy's brain weighed 1,500 grams, which is more than average, yet he was allegedly missing half his brain by the time he got there. And that the brain in the pictures taken by Stringer and Knudsen, they show a grayed brain, like one that had been soaked in formaldehyde for 3 weeks. A fresh brain that has not been put in formaldehyde is a pinkish and whitish hue, not gray. And they ascertain that, well, because Bethesda is a naval hospital, is a research hospital, many human brains are preserved, to be used as scientific specimens to practice on. If you need to dissect a brain or you need to study a brain for whatever reason, they seemingly have a lot of them sitting around in pickle jars at Bethesda Naval Hospital. So the the inclination of folks like Dr. David Manick, who've seen this stuff, Doug Horn, is that the brain that we have pictures of in the National Archives is not Kennedy's brain. Well, why don't we have pictures of Kennedy's brain? Well, it would clearly show the path of the bullet uh, and what's missing. If a bullet is fired from behind and enters the rear of the brain, there's going to be a blowout in the front, and you're going to have a lot of brain matter uh, expelled through the front of the head. If a bullet comes through the front, you're going to have the path going from front to back to where it expels to a larger hole as it tears its way out of your skull, and with it takes a bunch of brain matter. And this is why they posit that the brain that was photographed in the pictures that are in the archive is not Kennedy's brain, period. So that's another problem. George Berkeley, Kennedy's personal physician, he was at Bethesda and Parkland. How does he, who supposedly saw the thing that everybody else saw at Parkland, which was an entrance wound in the throat and a rear head blowout, how does he explain what is supposedly found at Bethesda, where there's no right occipital region blowout, and now the entrance wound, obstructed by a tracheotomy done, is now an exit wound. Well, George Berkeley was never called by the Warren Commission to give his experience, to give what he saw, to give any testimony at all about anything. Now, for the HSCA, George Berkeley had a change of heart, and he wrote Richard Sprague a letter explaining that he believed that there was a conspiracy. He believed that that Oswald did not act alone. He believes that there was a frontal shot and rear shot, and he was ready to put what he had been feeling for the past 15 years and what he'd been burdened with for the past 15 years. He wanted to tell the HSCA what he thought about things. Well, after receiving Berkeley's letter, Richard Sprague was forced out of his position 2 weeks later. George Berkeley was never deposed by the HSCA. He merely wrote an affidavit, of which I have not seen, by the way. And if anybody knows or they have seen it, please send it my way. I'm very interested to check it out. But interesting that in 1981, George Berkeley told researcher Henry Hurt that he knew of a conspiracy, and that when pressed on it further and followed up with, uh, Berkeley told Henry Hurt that he did not want to talk about it anymore. And then the next year, a researcher by the name of Kurtz, he told him the same thing. He knew of a conspiracy. Oswald didn't act alone. There was a frontal shot. And then when pressed more about it and asked to talk, he said the same thing. He backed down again. Um, so when it came time for the ARRB, Berkeley was dead by then. But they decided to contact his daughter and get permission to contact his George Berkeley's lawyer at the time, his office, to see if his lawyer had anything in his files about what George Berkeley wanted to tell the HSCA and Richard Sprague. And to which she agreed. And then suddenly, uh, the ARB gets a letter back saying that George Berkeley's daughter changed her mind. She does not want to comply with their request any longer, and do not contact her ever again, and have a great life. So that's interesting. The movie moves on, of course, to our hapless Patsy himself, Mr. Lee Oswald. They tell us, about his fingerprints of intelligence, and joining the Marines and being stationed in Atsugi, where U-2 flights, and his defection to Russia, and his connections with the FPCC, and when he returns and he's in New Orleans, he tells us about the 544 Camp Street printed on the Fair Play for Cuba committee letters. Uh, they pretty much state that these are the actions of a provocateur. Um, and the funny thing about it is, of course, we agree. This is very odd behavior. We have you know, a young American kid growing up and wanting to join his big brother's footsteps and join the military service. And, he's done everything they've asked him to do. He's given a secret clearance at a CIA base in Japan. as a radar operator. He knows things about the U-2 overflights into Russia, and allegedly gets released from the military service due to a accident by his mother, which he goes home and then hops on a boat and makes his way to Russia, where he defects. This is odd behavior, folks. Odd behavior. And of course, you have him going into uh, Carlos Bernier's store and offering to help him train Cuban exiles, to fight Castro. And then a couple days later, he's arrested in the street because Bernier and his buddies caught wind that this guy is wearing a Free Castro placard around his neck and handing out these leaflets about the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which is a total contradiction. It's a total contradiction. It's obviously he's up to something, you know. He's pretending to be one way or the other, folks. There's no getting around it. And what we learned from later documents is that a fellow by the name of George Joannides, who worked for the CIA in the 60s in Florida and New Orleans, and who was basically a CIA paymaster that supported a lot of these um, anti-Castro Cuban exile groups and funded them, um, was set up by the HSCA to be the liaison for all the documents coming out of the CIA to the HSCA. And they had specifically requested that this liaison not have any connection whatsoever to any activities going on in that area in 1963. But what they did not know at the time is that they were completely snowballed by the CIA. They called this guy Joannides out of retirement, and he was the perfect screen to make sure that nothing damning about what was going on by these anti-Castro Cuban exile groups in Louisiana and Florida were made public. And this was uncovered by Jefferson Morley, who I believe still has, lawsuits in place against the CIA to release the Joannides files, so we can see once and for all what this guy was up to and who he was talking to and what he was doing exactly. But it's very interesting, that of course the CIA we know now was funding a lot of these anti-Castro Cuban exile groups, and it'd be interesting to know if the Cuban student the directorate, the DRE, of which Carlos Bernier was a member, was on this stuff, and if they were attached to the group that was headquartered out of 544 Camp Street. Hopefully one day we'll get there. There's lots of accusations accused of Bannister, as there was in the movie JFK, without a whole lot of backup from documentation. It's asserted that, oh, he's a former FBI man. He was friends with Hoover. The CIA offices in New Orleans were right across the street from Bannister's office. He had connections there. And he was doing work, basically, to weed out any pro-communists in the area who might show up at, an FPCC meeting or pay dues to join whatever club it is that supports Castro. I mean, it's pretty easy to do this kind of thing. The FPCC was very popular on college campuses at the time, um, like Tulane, and who, in a show I did not too long ago about the FPCC, there's ties to a professor on at Tulane University and the FPCC who Oswald was asked about and who he denied knowing, but interesting stuff nonetheless. Um, then we get into more about the Oswald's defection and another subject that Eugenio loves to talk about, and that's Otto Atepka, who was a Department of State director of personnel who it came into his purview that there was a lot of um, overseas defectors that were former military men, and he made a list. And he wrote the CIA a letter, and he wanted to know who were the real ones and who were the fake ones. And of course, Angleton took the lead. James Angleton took the lead on answering Otto Atepka's letter, of which um, Lee Oswald's name was in, and nothing was said about it. A couple months later, Otto Atepka was set up and fired 17 days before the assassination actually went down. They claimed that he had been burning confidential documents in his burn bag. And as I said, he was let go 17 days before the assassination on November the 5th, 1963, from the State Department. Then we move on to, of course, Clay Shaw, folks. The man accused of uh, being involved in a conspiracy to assassinate the president involving David Ferry and the whole Dean Andrews thing. And of course, Lee Oswald. Um, it plays this interview with Clay Shaw, in which he denies any association with the CIA whatsoever. And of course, the ARB comes out with documents where Shaw was actually associated with CIA. He was a highly paid CIA asset. He had a 5-agency clearance and participated in the QK Enchant or QK Enchant CIA program, which basically involved businessmen who traveled to other countries frequently to report back to the CIA and any pertinent information that might be gleaned or collected in these foreign countries. And of course, in the movie, and this is from a unpublished Weisberg book about Norman Mailer's tales, that Weisberg asserts that Dean Andrews told him personally that Shaw was Bertrand and to not say anything until after he was dead. So that is a big, big, big admission. And Dean Andrews certainly would have been one to know who the hell Clay Shaw was, or Clay Bertrand was. And for those interested more in the Dean Andrews story, look for an upcoming episode of the Lone Gunman podcast focusing on Mr. Dean Andrews, the jive-talking lawyer from New Orleans. Then we get into a little bit about the FBI files on Oswald. Of course, we know that the FBI was interested in Oswald as soon as he got back from his defection. They talked to him. They kind of debriefed him a little bit. They were interested in what he was doing. Oswald asked to talk to them after he was arrested after the fracas on Canal Street with Bernier. And we all know James Boosty and what he was doing as far as trying to speak to Oswald or Oswald's wife. I don't know which one they were more interested in, but certainly interesting. But in the movie, it's alleged that there was a flash on Oswald, which is basically a blinking red light on his files, which means that nobody could add to them or request them without setting off an alarm and going through the FBI espionage division. Okay? That would be the spy division, which is what they thought either Lee Oswald was due to his defection or what his wife was due to the fact that she came back with him to the United States. The flash on Oswald, or the Oswalds, was canceled October the 9th, 1963. This was, of course, after Oswald had come back from allegedly doing some really shady shit in Mexico City. And it was also about this time the CIA canceled their flash on Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, what this apparently did is that when you have a flash on your FBI file, that means you are put on a security index, which is given to the Secret Service, which means, hey, this guy is a problem. This guy has made threats. We think this guy is a threat type of deal. And supposedly, what the Secret Service is supposed to do on its advanced trips is ascertain where the security index individuals are and make sure that they are detained while the president is in the city, basically, so that he's safe. So that happened on October the 9th, 1963, which basically means for some reason Oswald was taken off the security index so he would not be deemed a threat. And of course, this is after he went to Mexico City, allegedly, and tried to score a visa to Cuba via the Cuban consulate and the Russian consulate, and pulling a gun in the Russian consulate with the head of the assassination division 13, Valery Kostanov, allegedly, and crying and putting on a big old show, allegedly. That would have set off alarm bells. The CIA had his phone tapped. We have a letter from J. Edgar Hoover about these phone calls. He said the person on the phone is not Oswald. The person in the photos that the CIA sent him was not Oswald. So they have a problem. They have a big, big problem. But all this seems to coalesce right about the time Oswald is moved into position in Dallas, and he obtains a job at the School Book Depository. Next up, we hear from researcher Paul Blue about the Chicago plot on November the 2nd. And, we've all heard about Thomas Arthur Valet, who was the alleged patsy, much like Oswald. And in fact, he had a very specific background compared to Oswald. They were both ex-Marines. They had both allegedly trained Cuban exiles to fight Castro. They were both based at top secret CIA locations in Japan that did U-2 overflights. Now, he wasn't based at Isugi, but it was another one close by. Oswald was moved into position to Dallas from New Orleans a couple months before the assassination. Thomas Arthur Valet was moved from Long Island to Chicago a couple months before the assassination attempt. Now, allegedly, somebody, and we get this whole another story, and this one actually comes from Judy Baker and I believe Abraham Bolden, that somebody named Lee had called the FBI and tipped them off that there was an assassination plot afoot in Chicago. Now, there was four Cuban exiles who were told by the Secret Service, or who were told to the Secret Service by the Chicago PD, that their landlady had seen a bunch of rifles, some diagrams of the parade route, things like this. And they did surveillance on these four Cubans, and they ended up botching it pretty bad. Two of these Cubans got away. They arrested two of them. And it wasn't until the morning of the canceled Chicago trip, November the 2nd, that Thomas Arthur Valet was arrested for allegedly making boisterous comments about wanting to kill Kennedy. And these alleged four Cubans were pretty much forgotten about. And then on the Tampa trip, on November the 17th, they talk about Gilberto Policarpo Lopez, who was, I guess, supposed to be the patsy in Tampa. This guy attended many FPCC meetings. He was a Cuban exile, and what saved him is he got the hell out of the country before any of this went down. And it was asserted, again, there's not much documentation or corroboration on this, that Lopez might have actually been implicated as Oswald's partner in Dallas, as his accomplice in this whole thing. Now, what's interesting about Thomas Arthur Valet is he secured a job at a tall building along the parade route with a sharp turn in front of it. That was the perfect kill zone, just like Dealey Plaza. It's pretty crazy when you think about it. And then we get into a little bit about Abraham Bolden and how the Secret Service kept the Chicago plot secret. Many of the agents that were in Dallas didn't even know about the Chicago plot or the assassination attempt. And again, we hear about Elmer Moore, who again comes up. This is the guy that intimidated Malcolm Perry into changing his. And maybe, it's a tribute to how things and fucked up and backwards and upside down everything has become since then. I don't know. I don't like the JFK Revisited part of the title either. Again, I don't like Whoopi Goldberg narrating this thing. And of course, I could do without Alan Dulles every 5 minutes. But again, you expect as much when Jim DiEugenio is writing the project. As a vehicle to open minds and to shed light on the Kennedy assassination as a whole to those folks who may not be familiar or weren't alive even when the movie JFK came out, I think it serves as an excellent starting point to get people interested in the case again, which is what the movie JFK did in the first place. All of us researchers don't love the movie because it's historically accurate. We love it for what it did, and that is get a lot of these records released. We have so much more information thanks to the JFK Records Act and the ARRB than we ever did before. I mean, could you imagine if all we had to go on was what we have from the Warren Commission and the HSCA? And we wouldn't even have a lot of that if it wasn't for the ARRB. It'd be a lot more speculation books out there instead of factual-based good stuff that we've gotten over the years from people like John Newman and folks like that. But that's it for me. Let me know. Hit me up, the Lone Gunman podcast at gmail.com. Let me know what you thought of the movie if you've seen it. Let me know if you agree with my assessment of it. And we'll go from there. It's a good thing, folks. It's a good thing. And of course, part of my job is to get on here and critique it, which I think I did fairly. Again, if this movie would have been written by somebody else, it would probably say a lot of different things. But I think the idea as a whole to do what it's designed to do, which is this movie was never made to solve the case. This documentary was never made to solve the case. It's meant to get more eyes on the case, to get more people interested in the case. And as long as it does that, then it's doing something good. So all in all, I would definitely recommend it. Definitely check it out. And let me know what you think. Make sure you're following the YouTube channel at the Lone Gunman Podcast on YouTube. And you can follow me on Twitter at the Lone Gunman 7. And thank you, folks. The assassination anniversary is right around the corner. I promise you another show before that happens, but I had to come out with this special episode and talk about the documentary, and I hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon, folks. Peace.